Hey guys, it's Sam. Before we get today's episode started, I wanted to draw one thing to your attention. We are still looking for people to join us this fall for our year program here at Love Thy Neighborhood. You're listening to this now, you're thinking that the fall may be still several months away, but we do want to encourage you to go ahead and apply. The application deadline to do that is July 23rd. If you haven't already, go online to our website, lovethyneighborhood.org. Read up on all of the amazing nonprofits that we work with. We would love to place you with one of them with a cause that you're passionate about. So a reminder, the application deadline is July 23rd, but please go ahead and apply now so we can begin conversations with you so you can make plans for the next year of your life. We would love to be a part of it. Again, our website is lovethyneighborhood.org. Okay, on to the episode.
I want you guys to imagine a bullseye. And in this bullseye, there are only two circles. The outer circle is our circle of concern. And in the inner circle of that bullseye is your circle of responsibility.
This is a show about self-discovery.
About understanding ourselves.
About looking into the mirror to see the good,
the bad,
and the unknown of who we are.
This is about how we relate to God.
And everyone else.
From Love Thy Neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky.
Welcome.
Welcome to the Enneacast.
Hey, welcome to the Enneacast. I'm Jesse Eubanks.
And I'm Sam Stevenson.
Every episode, we walk you through the Enneagram, and today we come to a special topical episode, actually about boundaries.
We, beginning of the season, before we started recording, asked you guys what topics you wanted to hear, and boundaries actually came up a lot. So we wanted to set aside time to walk through what are boundaries, how can we implement them, and give you really practical ways to start living a life with healthy boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries is one of the most difficult things I think that we journey through as people. Understanding the appropriate relationship that we have with other people, with ourselves, with stewarding our time, with our limitations, and physical needs. Boundaries it's a difficult subject.
Yeah, I feel like you only ever hear about boundaries when it comes to dating and premarital relationships and almost giving you things of what not to do. And we're not necessarily talking about boundaries in that sense. We're talking about a holistic picture of boundary of the soul and what's mine to own versus what is someone else's responsibility.
Yeah, good, healthy boundaries are life-giving, not life-taking. And I think it's also important that we remember, good, healthy boundaries are always created in a healthy, supportive community. And so we're going to talk a lot about boundaries today, but the assumption is this, at the end of every episode, we tell you, go unpack these things in community. And boundaries is no exception. The only way that you're going to have healthy boundaries is also to be surrounded by a healthy community. So here to talk about boundaries is our special guest, Kiana Brown. So Kiana actually co-founded Love Thy Neighborhood with me, and she's been a part of this staff since the very beginning. We've known each other for, a very long time.
10 years?
10-ish years. I officiated over her wedding as well. Her and her husband are both alumni of our program. Kiana is a 2 on the Enneagram, and 2s often struggle with boundaries. So I guess let's start. Why did this topic of boundaries become important to you?
Yeah, so probably in college was when I would say my boundary issues were at their worst. So I was involved in 5 or 6 clubs and organizations, and I was leading 3 of those. I had 4 part-time jobs. I was in school full-time.
Oh my gosh. All this at the same time?
Yes. I don't know when I slept. Maybe I didn't.
Wow, yeah.
So I had kind of just, was doing that as my norm, and then came for a summer to serve with LTN. And there was a lot of boundaries in LTN. One day a week, I was not allowed to work, and I was required to rest. That was a totally new thing for me. I was required rest? What is this? So I think during that time was when I became aware of the issues that I had with boundaries. So after that summer, went back and finished up college and really cut back on the amount of things that I was involved with and probably started sleeping again.
Yeah, right.
So that's kind of when I became more aware of it and started working on it and started kind of exploring the issues of boundaries. And as a Christian, how does that relate, boundaries in the Christian faith? How do those relate to each other? And kind of has been something I've been passionate about and excited about learning and teaching since then.
Yeah. So speaking of scripture and the biblical foundations, can you give us some context What context in Scripture do you see for boundaries?
Yeah, so one thing that I see a lot in Scripture is, a lot of people will talk about like Jesus going away to rest. That's a very common thing. And we say like, oh, he had boundaries. He would go and he would rest, but also relational boundaries. He, wasn't BFFs with every single person he met. He had a tight circle of 12, but then an inner circle of 3. So good relational boundaries. He shared, different things with those different circles of people. Another helpful example that I like to tell people is in Galatians 6, 2 through 5. So I'm going to read that really fast. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. Each one will bear his own load. So burden in this passage, bear one another's burdens, is referring to something too heavy for one person to carry. It's a boulder. It's impossible to carry by yourself. But then we see at the end of this passage, for each will bear his own load. Load here is referring to something heavy, but not impossible to carry. So think of like a heavy backpack that you carry. Like it is heavy, but it's yours to carry. It's not the other person's responsibility.
Why are boundaries important?
We are created with boundaries. So the Lord, created us on earth. That's a boundary, a physical boundary. He created us in bodies, physical bodies. He created time. So I believe that the Lord created us to live within certain boundaries. He created those boundaries as good, holy things. And the reason that I think they're important is because we are not infinite beings. We don't have infinite energy or time or space.
Yeah.
And so to learn to live within those boundaries is to learn how to relate in a healthy way, emotionally and relationally to other people, to ourselves, with the Lord spiritually, and then within, like physical boundaries as well.
Yeah, that's good. As we get into our conversation about boundaries, is there anything that you feel like we need to be thinking about before we even start the conversation?
So boundaries are rooted in identity. So who I am determines what I do, not the opposite. So for me, I am a daughter of God. Because I am a daughter of God, that determines what I do. Therefore, I'm not enslaved to what other people think, what the world says, because my identity is in Christ. That's where my boundaries come out of.
Give me the flip side of that. What happens when we have a wrong identity?
So, I am a volunteer in the kids ministry. And because I'm a volunteer in the kids ministry, I have to help every time there's a need. So we've flipped what I do is I'm a volunteer. What you're doing is determining your boundaries, which is where we get into a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So speaking of, the different, types of pitfalls with boundaries, Kiana, whenever you teach this workshop with our interns, you talk about the spectrum of boundaries. So can you articulate that a little bit more? I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah. So kind of when we're thinking of the spectrum of boundaries, you want to think on one side, we have someone that has no boundaries. And then on the opposite side, we have someone that just has unmovable boundaries. And I typically tell people when they're thinking through, like, where do I land on this spectrum? It's helpful to think, first of all, as like an overall, like, where do I land? But then subsequently, it's helpful to think about it. Where do I fall on this boundary spectrum at work, when I'm at home, when I am relating to technology, when I'm relating to the Lord, when I'm with my family? So it's helpful to kind of break it down because obviously those issues are going to vary depending on what kind of situation you're in.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Enneagram types in terms of the spectrum of boundaries. Like, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts. I've been thinking a little bit about this, but I actually thought it would be super helpful if the three of us discuss this together because I'd love to get your input as well. You guys are the Enneagram experts.
Yes,
so
that's true. That's
maybe we can put
One of us more than the other.
Enneagram and boundary experts together. So the ones we see struggling, I see struggling more with that unmovable kind of, that sense of
they're very rigid.
Right and wrong. They're more rigid. They tend to be unmovable.
Yeah, I think they tend to be unmovable because of their personal strong moral values. But I also think that they can oscillate if the person that's making the request or the situation can tap into that. If they can appeal directly enough to that person's, moral standards, then all of a sudden I think the boundary becomes fuzzy for them because they go, oh, maybe I am being wrong on this, and therefore I need to do the right thing. So I think they tend to be unmovable, but if you appeal in the right way to their morals, then I think it can get fuzzy for those folks.
Yes. And then so for the 2, we see them struggling with no boundaries. So there's a lot of people pleasing, and because all of what they're doing comes out of that sense of needing to please others.
Yeah, and if it gets bad enough, that's when you get into codependency, which is all of my boundaries are actually just defined by other people's needs. And so my boundaries are literally, I don't have any. I'm just defined by whatever the needs are in front of me, and I react and respond to those.
Yeah, so very little self-awareness of your own needs, but high awareness of others' needs. The 3 we also see struggling with no boundaries. They can often struggle with manipulating others, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, I think that's really good to keep in mind. And I also wonder if they can swing back and forth because of their tendency to shapeshift and become who people need them to be. And they kind of lose their sense of self in the process. I don't know if that ever becomes an issue of boundaries, but I do wonder if they have the propensity to kind of ebb and flow based on, the image that they're trying to keep, or the networking and the relating that they're trying to accomplish. So I think for 3s, having a clear sense of self can be difficult. Therefore, boundaries can be difficult to maintain.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. So the 4 can struggle sometimes with being unmovable due to just having particular tastes, and just they're not easily swayed. They like what they like.
Yeah. We tend to be, like I've called us this before, like we tend to be like the keepers of cool. Like we're like, we define what is culture, and we tend to be snobby. It's one of the pitfalls of the type 4. That being said, we also go to that non-resourceful 2 space, in particular situations where if somebody else is like, they could be making an unreasonable request of us, and we really feel the temptation to cave to it because we just want to keep the relationship intact, or we really want to make them happy. Like, so 4s are interesting creatures because we can be like really firm on our boundaries, and then all of a sudden we can turn into people pleasers as well.
And again, going back to like kind of think about where you fall on that spectrum in different situations. At work, you might tend towards one side of the spectrum. At home, we might tend towards another side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
The 5s tend to be more unmovable. They have researched what they think about something, and they know what they think about something. They are firm in the decision they've made. They can often struggle with generosity and letting people in, so just having really high boundaries that are difficult to let other people in.
What's interesting, too, again, though, about the 5s, if you stress them out, they go into the 7 space where they get real scattered. And a lot of 5s that I talk to will complain about that they overbook themselves. They start saying yes to everything because they lose their bearings. So I think that most commonly a 5 operates out of that unmovable space. Like they're very particular about their alone time, the structure of their life, the things they read, the things that they take in. But you stress them out enough and they kind of lose their way a little bit and get disoriented.
Yeah, so the 6s are kind of interesting. So we see on the one hand the no boundaries. They want to make other people afraid. They want other people to see the situation the same way they do. And they can kind of run over other people's sense of self. On the other side, we see them kind of being unmovable. That same fear that was once just trampling people can make them just not want to participate in whatever is going on. So I'm terrified, and therefore no one can convince me otherwise that this thing is true.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky for the 6 because of their self-doubt that they can begin to look outward for their sense of security and safety. So I think it's important, like you're mentioning, to keep in mind the different categories of life, because 6s at work, especially when there's authority involved, can lose a sense of self and lose boundaries and adhere to the boundaries of the stronger personality or presence in the room. But then maybe in other contexts, they're the ones setting the boundary. They're the ones with the authority. And so 6s can kind of oscillate between both ends of the spectrum.
So 7s often commonly struggle with having no boundaries. They want to do it all. They have probably the most FOMO of any number. So they have a lot of difficulty with appropriate time boundaries. Like, how do I manage my time? I've been invited to 5 parties and they're all at the same time, and I want to go to all of them. Which party do I say yes to, and which ones am I turning down?
Yeah, what's funny, though, is, again, the 7 stress them out, and they go into this one space where they actually can become very demanding of other people. And so they can have very low standards at times for themselves, but they can have very high expectations of the party or of the situation they're walking into or what they think it should be like. And so they typically occupy the space where they struggle with boundaries, but stress them out enough or they dislike something enough, and they can actually become very rigid like the ones. Unhealthy ones, guys.
Yes. So now moving on to the 8s, a common struggle for the 8s is having no boundaries. They kind of run over other people, and that is, for a variety of reasons.
But in peer relationships, they keep their cards close. It's hard for them to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is something that they are constantly thinking about and trying to fight against. And so I think that they actually can stonewall the people around them by setting up too many boundaries of not appearing weak and not allowing for that connection and that belonging to happen because of their deeply, rooted walls that they've kind of put up to keep others out. Again, I think this is just to further your point of to be mindful of the category in which you're, interpreting your life, because in leadership, they can be very boundless, but, talking to them kind of behind closed doors, I think that they can have a lot of boundaries kind of in place.
Correct. Yeah. So then for the 9s, again, we kind of see that oscillating back and forth. So we see on the one end, the no boundaries, they're going to go with the flow, not declare themselves as often. They don't want to rock the boat, disturb the peace. So they're going to have no boundaries, kind of go with whatever the crowd. If everyone wants to eat at this one place, they're just going to go with it. Then we also see on the other side, the unmovableness, that kind of quiet, passive stubbornness.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. Yeah, that's true. 9s, I think their default is to make sure that everybody else is doing okay and is feeling at peace and comfortable. And so that process and that disposition can only hold out for so long. And then 9s just have certain rigid demands that they're not going to move on. And it feels like, why are you being stubborn? Why is this the one thing that you're freaking out about? And it's because they've kind of alleviated and given up so much control in other aspects that their souls are kind of saying like, I need control of this one thing, and it might not make sense, and it probably doesn't, and it's probably not even the thing I should be as passionate about, but I'm not going to waver on this thing.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
Yeah, pushing a 9 really...
It's like pushing a beanbag.
Yeah, it really reveals that stubbornness that's not typically, visible on the surface.
Yeah. Cool. I think that was really helpful, kind of starting us off to kind of think about that spectrum, and if you just listen to your type, and as we kind of helped unpack and understand, and you're thinking like, that doesn't really sound like me. Well, that's probably good, because when we talk about boundaries and boundary issues, we're really getting at that false self, your non-resourceful traits. And so if you're hearing that kind of walking through the numbers and you didn't resonate with what we just said, well, maybe it's because you've got boundaries kind of under control. So
yeah, and the big thing is we want to help people identify the areas in which you are vulnerable to attack. You're vulnerable to suffering. We could do an entire episode about how awesome your boundaries are, but that probably won't be all that helpful to you. Mm-hmm. So we really want to help walk you through areas where you may be vulnerable to hardship.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to add here that boundaries are not permanent. So in different seasons of life, your boundaries will kind of change and shift, and that's not necessarily an unhealthy thing. Boundaries are not immovable walls that we set up, but they can shift depending on the season and in different areas.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because we can all move along the spectrum, but it's important that we ask ourselves, like, what's our most common tendency? And also, like, what's the context that these boundary issues are showing up in? Yes. So we could have really firm boundaries in one context and no boundaries in another context. And so we need to understand, like, this is how I am at work. This is how I am at home. This is how I am with my friends, with my spouse, with my in-laws, with my kids. Like, context changes everything. Okay, so when we come back, Kiana's going to walk us through ways to help us have healthy boundaries. So stay with us. Okay, so this whole episode, like, we're talking about boundaries, right? Like this idea of like being overly compensating. But in some cases, we talk about that we never adjust our boundaries for other people, like that there are people in need and we just don't want to respond to that.
Yeah, I think the concept of boundaries to me was an invitation to let people in and to extend myself for the sake of other people.
Yeah, and I think that like responding to these needs in the world around us, like that's part of God's call to justice. Mm-hmm. Okay, to that end, check this out. This is Hannah Eland. She works for International Justice Mission in Washington, D.C., and this is what she had to say about her time serving with Love Thy Neighborhood.
My time at LTN was a stepping stone for my development in my professional life. I firmly believe that every single person does kingdom work. You don't have to work at a nonprofit to do this. And the amazing thing is that God invites us into his story of justice for our broken society. He uses us to carry this out, and it's such a privilege.
So if you are like Hannah and you're looking for a place to get involved in kingdom work, we want to encourage you to consider what it would be like for you to serve with Love Thy Neighborhood.
All you have to do is head over to lovethyneighborhood.org. You can check out our dozens of internships. Come and serve with us for either a summer or a year. Head over to lovethyneighborhood.org and apply today.
So, Jesse, I have a question.
Okay.
What is something that Love Thy Neighborhood gets some pushback on sometimes, and like what are you doing about it?
Yeah, a lot of folks kind of pause when they hear us using terms like social justice. And we're aware, that people have concerns about that language, but we've decided that we want to help them with that. So we actually created this tool, this free download called What is Biblical Social Justice? Scripture's Call for Radical Mercy. And it's free. Whenever you sign up on our mailing list, you can get this download, and it will walk you through what is a Christian biblical approach to social justice.
Man, that sounds like it's going to be really helpful. Where would somebody go to get that tool?
Yeah, actually, they would just head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/justforyou, and they would get what is biblical social justice, but they would actually also get a bunch of other free giveaways. So if folks want to get those free gifts, including what is biblical social justice, just head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/justforyou. Hey, welcome back to the Enneacast. I'm Jesse Eubanks.
And I'm Sam Stevenson.
Okay, so we're here with Kiana Brown, our operations administrator here at Love Thy Neighborhood, and she's a Type 2 on the Enneagram, and Type 2s commonly struggle with boundaries, so Kiana's been on her own journey of working through the topic of boundaries over the last several years. So before the commercial break, we went over the spectrum of boundaries and over a lot of the common problems that different Enneagram types encounter as regards boundaries. So now I want us to move forward and to change from having unhealthy boundaries to healthy ones. So let's talk a little bit about that. Kiana, one of the first things that you mentioned is about understanding your own responsibility. Can you tell me something about that?
Yeah, so for me, my journey with boundaries came with understanding what's my responsibility and what is not my responsibility. So your boundaries, what's within them, some examples are your feelings. So I'm in charge of my feelings. I think a common thing that I hear often is, you made me feel that way. That's bad boundaries. We can't make somebody feel that way. We are responsible for our actions. My actions are within my boundaries. Some other examples, your beliefs, your behavior, your choices, your talents, your thoughts, those are within your boundaries. Those are your responsibility. So those are some examples of what is your responsibility, what's within your boundaries.
I think what's really important in this is that you're getting at the idea of your own personal agency. And I say that in contrast with people that take a victim posture. Anytime that we're in a victim posture, we will not grow as people. It is not possible. Yeah. And so if we're in a posture where we're saying, you made me feel this way, you made me believe this, I can't do that, I can't think that, I can't believe that, we are giving all of our agency away to other people and taking a victim posture. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't times where we are legitimate victims. But thematically, if we take a victim posture in life, our boundaries are going to be terrible and we are not going to grow as people.
Mm-hmm. So, Kiana, whenever you teach, you talk about what's called the boundaries filter. Can you just explain what that is and how it can be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. So the boundaries filter that I personally use and I recommend other people use is just 2 circles. So for the boundary filter, I want you guys to imagine a bullseye. And in this bullseye, there are only 2 circles. The outer circle is our circle of concern. Those are areas and tasks, things that are important to us, but they're outside of our responsibility. And in the inner circle of that bullseye is your circle of responsibility. And that contains specific areas and tasks that are your responsibility to attend to. So those things we mentioned earlier, the feelings, the beliefs, the thoughts, your responsibility. Outside of those things would fall the circle of concern.
Okay, let me give you a couple scenarios and you can tell me which one of these falls into. You have a 3-year-old child and it's lunchtime and they're hungry and they need to eat and they don't know how to make their own food. Which category does that fall into?
Yeah, so as a parent, that would be my responsibility to get lunch ready for my child. That would fall within my circle of responsibility. However, my 3-year-old should know how to feed himself a sandwich. So I'm not responsible for physically getting the sandwich in his mouth, but getting the food ready for him to eat would fall within my responsibility as the parent of that child.
Okay, let's say that a friend of yours needs a ride to the airport at 4 a.m. and you're home with your kid, and it means you would need to get up yourself and your child to go pick up your friend and take them to the airport. Which category would that fall into?
That would be a hard pass for me. No, that would be your circle of concern. So that is something that you just can't do. You can be concerned about that person and even help that person, give them suggestions. But again, even the giving them suggestions or other ideas would not be your responsibility to do that.
Let me give you 2 more. How about you have reports due at work every single Monday and it is almost the end of the day Monday. It's time to get the report in. That would be in which circle? That
would be your responsibility. So that is a job description. You're responsible for those things.
Okay. Your boss routinely contacts you after hours to ask you questions that they should already know the answer to. What circle is that in?
So that would be your concern, and that is probably something you should talk to your boss about.
Yeah. So I think that I remember when you first came with this diagram a couple years ago, you picked it up at a conference and you came back and you actually drew it on the board. And it's like so simple. Like I love how simple it is and so obvious once you actually map it, where you're like, it's 2 circles. It falls in this category or this category. And I feel like this is like the exact kind of tool that a lot of people just need to put to use.
Yeah, and I think something that is interesting about this, so the circle of concern is much bigger. It's the outer circle of that bullseye. It's larger. We have more that is within our circle of concern than the responsibility. And I think a lot of issues come when we switch that, when the circle of responsibility becomes the outer circle and we start becoming responsible or thinking that we're responsible for more than we actually are.
Yeah, which taps into, an unrealistic view of our capacities. We believe we are capable of far more than we are actually capable of. And having those appropriate boundaries allows you to go, I want to give of myself. I need to be realistic with my capacities. I only have so much to give, so who am I going to give it to?
I like that the language is called circle of concern because I think when it comes to the issue of boundaries, there's a tendency to feel like if I'm not the one directly involved, that means I don't care and I don't have concern for it. And I think it's an important distinction to make the difference between I don't care about that and I can't care about that. And it gets into the issue of capacity. Like I physically don't have enough energy to go around to care about every single issue. That doesn't mean that I don't care about it. It just means that my sense of self, I just don't have any to give, but that doesn't mean that I'm not concerned. So I like that the language from this diagram is still empathetic, and it allows people permission to say, like, I can be emotionally, in tune and kind of aware of what's happening here, but I don't need to contribute in the way that I would with my primary relationships and responsibilities.
So, Kiana, you've talked to us a little bit before about the fact that you really see that there are 4 different major categories of boundary issues. Can you walk us through those 4 categories and also just describe what they mean? And then I guess as listeners are listening to this, they should probably try to identify which of these 4 categories that they're in. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And similar to the spectrum, you're going to also want to think about where do I fall with these 4 common issues, at home versus work, versus friendships, technology, your relationship with the Lord. So you can kind of use these 4 types in a similar way as we did with the spectrum.
Yeah, great.
So the first one is the compliant. This is someone who can't say no. They feel guilty, they can feel controlled, and sometimes are controlled by others. They have difficulties setting boundaries, and when they do, those boundaries are often fuzzy and indistinct. Their circle of responsibility, that inside bullseye, has almost completely taken over the entire circle. Even the things they should just be concerned about are now included in their responsibility. So they really need to dial back that inner circle.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
So the next common boundary issue we see is the controller. This is someone who can't hear no. They often violate the boundaries of others. They're also kind of blaming others for what is theirs to own. So again, we see that circle of responsibility way too big. So they're micromanaging, they're as we would say, putting their hands in the cookie jars. They want all the cookies and all the jars. They want to know what's going on.
Yeah, so there's a tendency to be overly controlling and overly involved in other people's affairs that are not actually theirs. They don't give agency and autonomy to other people. They want to control everything. So their circle's too large, but for very different reasons.
Yeah, I think it's an important, the compliant type, number one, they can't say no, so they're going to say yes to everything. But this type, you said they can't hear no. And I think that's a really cool kind of distinction.
Yeah, and if we even think further back to the boundary spectrum, the compliant and the controller are going to land most often on no boundaries, on the no boundaries side of the spectrum.
Right.
So the third common boundary issue that we see is the non-responsive. This person can't say yes. So this person, if we're going back to the bullseye, this person often has just a vague, fuzzy bullseye. So that circle of responsibility and that circle of concern are very vague and fuzzy.
So the issue isn't even whether it's too small or too big. We actually don't even know what it is because they live with a general sort of vagueness as regards to other people needing things from them or what they even need or what they're even responsible for.
Yeah, absolutely. So the final common boundary issue that we see is the avoidant. This person can't hear yes. They set boundaries against receiving care from others. So again, going back to that picture of the bullseye, it's not so much about the size of it, but the fact that they are missing from that circle of responsibility from receiving care from others.
So in other words, what they fail to see is, so if we do circle of responsibility, they might be in the circle, but their understanding of I need help from other people, that's what's missing. The ability to receive care from other people and understanding that is a part of healthy boundaries is I need help from other people to do life.
That's correct. Yeah, they have often an inability to ask for help for themselves.
So receiving care, that's what's missing from that inner circle.
That's right. So the last two, the non-responsive and the avoidant, if we go back again to that spectrum, can often fall on the unmovable boundaries side of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful.
So Kiana, now that we've kind of gone through different ways to think about boundaries, we have a spectrum to consider, we have, a visual diagram, we have these categories. What are some other things for people to consider when it comes to setting their own boundaries and to acknowledging their boundaries?
Yeah, so I think another common issue that I see often when considering boundaries is just our expectations of others. Oftentimes we can expect people to have the same boundaries as us, and that can create conflict because each person's boundaries are going to be different depending on their personality, their life situation, their stage in life, just where
their
they
nationality, their ethnicity. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of issues with boundaries that can show up. Their gender, are the two people talking, are you different ages? Are you a superior, and a subordinate? I mean, there's a lot of issues within the boundaries. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just being considerate of others, that your boundaries are not going to translate to every other person.
Okay, so I guess then, what do we do with this? So we've diagnosed the problem. We've talked about, okay, I fall into this category or my bullseye looks like this. But at the end of the day, how do people actually pursue healthy boundaries and articulate those boundaries or live out those boundaries?
Yeah, so one of the most common things that I encourage people to start with when they're thinking about boundaries is making a list of your needs and your priority list. So again, this is why, I feel like the Enneagram is so helpful. The Enneagram gives us a self-awareness to be able to create that list of what are my needs as an individual, as a unique person. And I think a part of that is taking time alone to figure out what that is, but then at an appropriate time, bringing that into community to get their feedback.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Yeah. Any other practical tips?
Yeah, so kind of making a list or a schedule of what does an ideal week look like for me? Where am I getting time for rest if I'm someone that struggles to rest? Where am I stepping in if I'm someone that struggles to act? That needs list and that priority list is going to give you a filter by which to say yes and which to say no.
I think it's really important for that visual, like you said, like write down your ideal week, because for those of us that may struggle with overcommitment, you can write down your full week and you're like, oh my gosh, no wonder I'm exhausted because like look at all the things that I'm tending to. But for others of us that may struggle with that undercommitment or that passive delay, looking at your ideal week will help you realize like, oh, I might have more margin here than I thought. Because I know for me, whenever I struggle with committing or saying yes and I just say, oh, maybe I'll let you know, it's because I'm afraid that I'm not going to feel well rested or I'm not going to have time. So for me to like have a sense of self, have an established work week to look at in front of me, I can say like, oh, actually, I know I'll have margin later this week so I can say yes to you today, or, vice versa.
Well, for those that have been listening, hopefully as you listened, you identified which of these categories you fell into, where along the spectrum you found yourself, and that out of that you can begin to put a plan in place to develop more healthy boundaries. It's going to benefit your life. It's going to give you better relationships with God, with other people, with yourself. Kiana, thanks for walking us through all of that. Yeah. We respect your boundaries, except that we don't. So when we come back, we will be playing Enneagram SuperFight Boundaries Edition with Kiana Brown. Stay with us. Okay, so Sam, it is time for another Enneagram workshop.
I know, I'm so excited. We love doing them, and we're super excited to announce that we're doing another one in the fall.
So this fall, October 19th, 2019, join Sam Stevenson and I in Louisville for our next Enneagram workshop.
Yeah, we will have a ton of great things to give away. We're going to give away new books, prizes. We've got all kinds of visual content that we're going to go over, updated games. It's going to be a lot of fun.
We're going to help you understand all the ways that you are uniquely who you are, both the good and the bad. Sam will probably tell you the bad news. I'll tell you the good news.
Yeah.
So also on October 18th, we will be doing our Mapping Your Life Story workshop. So also you can sign up to join us there. And to top it off, we are offering a special discount for students. So for students, it's only going to cost you $10. That is a massive discount. So if you would like to be a part of our next Enneagram workshop, just head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/Enneagram workshop. And we hope to see you October 19th in Louisville, Kentucky. In today's episode of the Enneacast, we're exploring the topic of boundaries. And a lot of folks that struggle to create boundaries, they can also struggle with codependency and become overly attracted to people that are really in need. Well, to explore this topic a bit more, head over to our other podcast, the Love Thy Neighborhood podcast, and specifically check out episode number 12, where the gospel meets addiction.
I know that either God or Satan placed this piece of pot in front of me.
I look at substances more so as a person developing in a relationship too.
I went to elaborate lengths.
He thought the doorbell was wired to spy on us.
I don't know how, but I ended up with the nickname Jesus.
He was changed big time, yeah.
So subscribe now wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, or you can check us out on Spotify by searching for Love Thy Neighborhood, or head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/LTN podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Enneacast. I'm Jesse Eubanks.
And I'm Sam Stevenson.
And now it's time for Enneagram SuperFight Boundaries Edition. Okay, so SuperFight is a real game. It's made by Skybound Games. You can find it on Amazon or at superfightgame.com. We played this game in season 1 with our friends from No Chill Enneagram, and it was ridiculous. And so we wanted to bring it back for this season, but with a twist. Okay, so here's how the game works. We have a stack of cards with Enneagram numbers on them, and we have a stack of cards with random attributes on them. Sam and I are going to draw from each stack. The Enneagram number is going to be our fighter, and the attributes are going to be the abilities of that fighter. But here's the twist. Kiana, you are not going to build a fighter. Instead, since we're talking about boundaries, you are going to build a fortress. So you have a separate stack of cards that you will draw from to build your fortress. Once you have your fortress, and Sam and I have our fighters, We're then going to argue about how each of our fighters are going to be able to break through and conquer your fortress. And then you get to argue about how your fortress would withstand our attacks. Whoever has the best argument wins. We'll play 3 rounds. Here we go.
So I am an Enneagram 8.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm already going to win.
Unfair.
And I'm armed with a super glue fire hose. And dang it, I'm walking 12 wiener dogs. So maybe this will work out.
Okay, I am a type 1. I'm 100 stories tall, and I'm trapped in a potato sack.
All right, Kiana, what's the fortress?
Okay, so my fortress is a field of quicksand, but it is protected by adorable man-eating puppies and guarded by hurricane-force air cannons.
Okay.
So come at me. Come on.
Okay, so we got quicksand.
Quicksand.
Adorable puppies.
Adorable man-eating puppies. Not just adorable puppies.
Yeah, okay.
Man-eating puppies.
Uh-huh.
And it is also guarded by hurricane-force air cannons.
Honestly, I think my super glue fire hose could freeze the quicksand and kill your man-eating puppies. So I think I would be... I'm putting a lot of faith in my super glue fire hose because it's got a lot of force and it's going to make everything sticky and it'll counteract the quicksand. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a type 1, 100 stories tall, trapped in a potato sack. So I'm huge. Like, I'm gigantic. Like, even if I fell over in the potato sack, I'd probably just crush everything. Like, that's probably
including
just the
yourself.
end.
Like,
well, yeah,
you would sink into quicksand. You're so long.
Die in a glorious victory.
You would sink and you wouldn't have even the capacity to get out of the quicksand because you're so tall.
But I'm 100 stories tall. Even,
And you're in a potato sack, so you take one step, you fall down, you're stuck in quicksand. Sorry.
I'm like a potato sack champion.
Are you? Is that what it says? Or are you just stuck in one?
You know what quicksand's going to be like to a guy that's 100 stories tall?
Yeah.
It's walking on the beach and the sand moves under your feet. That's all that it's going to feel like.
Until he falls because he's in a potato sack. All right, Kiana, who would win?
So, first of all, quicksand does not care about super glue. It just sucks it down, just like everything else. Super glue does not have enough time to dry before the quicksand would suck it down.
I don't know.
Also, you are
guys.
walking wiener dogs, and they are going to be interested in my man-eating puppies because they're like, oh, other puppies, and then the puppies will destroy you.
Yeah, that's
so
really
you're
sad.
gone.
All right, Kiana, how would you destroy Jesse?
So, Jesse is 100 stories tall. That is an issue, but he's in a potato sack, so he's going to fall down. And once he has fallen down, my man-eating puppies will come and destroy him. And he can't get anywhere near me because I am guarded by hurricane-force air cannons.
Okay, well.
So who wins? So we're
Okay,
tossing
so let's
it to
do this.
Zabo?
We're gonna toss this over to producer Rachel Zabo, who's gonna give us her verdict. Rachel, what is your verdict?
Well, I was going to go with you until Kiana made her argument. That was a good argument. I think Kiana keeps her fortress.
Okay.
Victory for good boundaries.
Point for boundaries. Lame boundaries.
Okay.
Okay. Let's do round 2.
All right. I am an Enneagram 2, and I know Kung Fu, and I'm armed with a sniper rifle.
Okay, well, I'm a type 6, and I can walk through solid objects, but I also lay exploding eggs. That is a medical condition.
That sounds like a personal problem. All right, Kiana, what are you?
So, I am 100 feet of desert guarded by land sharks that is surrounded by geysers of boiling hair gel guarded by soul-eating ghosts.
What the heck?
Yeah, you win. I don't even know how to argue. I mean, my sniper rifle and Kung Fu are no match for any of those forces that you have on your side. Can I wave my white flag and surrender?
That was the best 9 argument I've ever heard.
What is my sniper rifle going to do with a geyser of hair gel? Nothing.
Okay, well, I'm a type 6. These folks are super courageous. So they're looking out and they see it all. They can see how far through the desert they got to go. They, what were the other things?
Geysers of boiling hair gel.
Okay, the geysers of boiling hair gel. Okay, those can be avoided.
Soul-eating ghosts.
Yeah.
That's a little problematic.
What am I going to do against that? Kung fu my way out? No.
Yeah. Okay. So the type 6s, they lay exploding eggs. My type 6s, so they could lay some eggs and then throw them, kill all the sharks. Okay, that's taken care of. Mm-hmm. And they can walk through solid objects, so they have some ability to like.
Ghosts are not solid objects.
I know, it's a little problematic. I don't exactly understand. Like, is it like the Dementors? Like, is that what we're...
Dementors, yes.
Okay, that's... I don't know what to do. Yours is so good. I'm with Sam. I think I'm going to lay down my arms. I'm going to give it to you. Okay, boundaries. You win again.
2 points.
Boundaries 2.
So this last round is worth 80,000 points. So for this last round, I am myself. I'm a 9, and I'm in a blimp, and I throw burritos. Honestly, this is my next move after I leave here, guys.
This is like your career move.
Yeah. It's just like a floating Chipotle. Like, it's the classic, like, it's the best case scenario for a 9. Can I win? I don't even know.
You would become queen of all the 9s. They would look up to you in the sky. They go,
like,
she's here. And they just burritos falling from the sky.
You're welcome.
Okay, I am also myself. I'm a type 4. Mm-hmm. I am driving a tank.
Of course.
That's kind of awesome. But I'm wearing one of those cones that they put on pets to keep them from licking themselves.
It is hilarious.
Wait, your fighter is wearing that, or the tank has one?
The tank, right?
No, just me.
But you're in a tank.
So the tank driver.
The tank driver. Okay. I myself
have
Jesse
limited
Eubanks
visibility
inside the tank.
Jesse is wearing a cone.
I'm wearing the cone of shame.
The cone of shame.
Jesse is wearing the cone of shame inside a tank. Sam is driving a blimp throwing Chipotle burritos.
Yep.
All right. I have a wall of butts.
What?
Guarded by the killer rabbit. And the wall has mouths. Very hungry mouths.
Ew.
Wait. Sam Stevenson?
Sam's burritos. You are feeding the wall.
And they're going to let me in.
No. I think you guys are too distracted by my wall of butts to even fight the wall.
Sam, I got an idea.
Okay. We team up.
Let's team up.
I'm in a blimp, so I can distract them with all the flying burritos.
Okay.
And you will drive the tank, and you don't even need the visibility that's limited by your cone of shame, because the wall will be looking upward at me, throwing them burritos, and I will be able to glide over the fortress, and you'll be able to plunder and destroy the fortress from outside. So I think that this is the one where we take you over and we win.
Okay, right. We're going to pass this one over to Rachel Zabo.
Sam feeds the mouths, and then you come with your tank and go...
Okay, so producer Rachel Zabo says the winner is Sam and I.
Yeah!
Boom! In your face, boundaries.
Boo!
We don't care about your boundaries. And now it's time for listener questions. So this question comes from LT1391. What is the difference between boundaries and shutting people out? It seems to be a fine line. It's a good question.
So what is the difference between boundaries and shutting people out? Sometimes I don't think there is a difference. Sometimes a healthy boundary is there is someone in our life that is very unhealthy, and we do need to have a boundary against that person. Other times, shutting people out is selfishly motivated, and it could be because we just don't want to deal with that person, or we don't feel like we have time. So there are times where, there are times for both. There are times to shut people out that are unhealthy and not good. There are other times that we may need to grow, expand that boundary a little bit, and bring people in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's just, again, it's important to know the difference between those categories. Like, who is it that I need to let into my life more, and who is it that I really probably don't need to be giving them access to these more sensitive, tender parts of my story. Mm-hmm. It's an unhealthy attachment, and I need to move them more to the peripheral, or even in some extreme cases, you may need to remove them from your life altogether. There are just some people that they are going to be destructive to our life, and a healthy boundary is that you can't be a part of my life because of the way that you've behaved. You can no longer be a part of my life. And so to Kiana's point, I think it is definitely, a boundary is just that. There's people that belong on the inside of the boundary, and there's people that belong on the outside of that boundary.
Yeah, we see that in Scripture with Jesus. He has people that are inside of that boundary, but he can't include everyone on his earthly ministry. Not everyone was inside of that boundary. And I will add, like, shutting people out doesn't give license or freedom to just be rude to people. There are healthy and appropriate ways to shut people out.
Yeah, and there's also the temptation too. You'll see it sometimes in folks where, they'll go like, I'm defriending and shutting out everybody that, that's been talking down to me lately. And it's from a disposition that's really, it's not mature. Because in many cases, if you scratch the surface, what's happening is people are just questioning. They're questioning them. Why did you say that thing? Why do you keep making these particular choices? And in many cases, those friends could actually be good friends because they're looking out for your best interest. But that's just going to take discernment. So just because somebody isn't always 100% your cheerleader, well, in fact, I would say this. If somebody is 100% always your cheerleader and they support everything, that's probably not a super healthy person to have in the center of your life.
Okay, next question comes from Simply Doulos Vibes. What is a safe way to say no?
So it seems like in terms of safety, this person is thinking about the safety of the relationship, the security. So it's important an important first step would be to assure that person first, we are secure in our friendship. This saying no has nothing to do with how I feel about you as a person or if I do or don't want you in my life.
Good friends allow you to say no. Mm-hmm. And somebody that is not a very healthy or committed friend, the moment you say no, if they disappear, it shows the fact that was probably not a healthy relationship. You need the ability to be your own person and to have a certain set of boundaries, sometimes even wrong boundaries. So, there is a reality that there are certain personalities that the moment you say no to them, they are done with the relationship. But think about that. Was it really a friendship to begin with if you never had the freedom to be able to set up a boundary within the relationship? So my encouragement would just be, to Kiana's point, like to affirm that friendship. Hey, I love you. You matter a lot to me. This friendship matters a lot to me. I'm not going to be able to do this thing, or I'm not comfortable with it. Whatever it is, like you establish that boundary. So I think there's room to both affirm the standing of the relationship while also being clear with the boundary that you're setting.
And this is a good one to, again, go back and think about your circle of concern versus your circle of responsibility.
It's good. Hey, this has been fun. It's been good having you in the studio.
Yeah, thanks. It was awesome.
Well, thank you to our guest today, Kiana Brown. Again, she is the Operations Administrator for Love Thy Neighborhood, which hopefully you know about by now if you've been listening to this podcast. Also, a lot of the content for our episode today came from the book Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. Also, thank you to Crosspoint Ministry, who trained Sam and I in the Enneagram. To learn more about Crosspoint or to attend one of their amazing retreats, visit crosspointministry.com.
Our show is a production of Love Thy Neighborhood. Love Thy Neighborhood provides social action internships supported by a Christian community for young adults ages 18 to 30. Come serve with us for a summer or a year. While you're here, you'll grow in your faith and your life skills. Learn more at lovethyneighborhood.org.
Today's episode was produced by myself, Sam Stevenson, and Rachel Zabo. Engineering and editing by Rachel Zabo. Music for today's episode comes from Murphy DX.
I'm Sam Stevenson.
And I'm Jesse Eubanks. Remember, the eye can see everything but itself. Find people to journey with you because you were created for community.